The sky over the small town of Millbrook cracked open just after midnight, and nobody was awake to see it happen. Elena Reyes was not asleep. She was in her kitchen, in her old blue robe, watering the tomato plants she kept on the windowsill, even though it was the wrong season for it. She hummed a tune her husband used to sing, badly, off-key, the way he always did when he thought no one was listening. He had been gone for 11 years now. Some nights the humming was the only way she could still hear his voice. Down the hall her son Marcus sat in the dark of his old bedroom, staring at a photograph he had looked at 1,000 times before. In it, a younger version of himself stood in a uniform he no longer wore, next to men whose names he was not allowed to say out loud anymore. He did not know why he had taken the photo out again tonight. Some nights the past just reached up and grabbed him by the throat, and he let it, because fighting it never worked. He heard his mother's voice from the kitchen. "Marcus, come look at this." He almost didn't go. He was tired, and some small, useless part of him wanted to stay in the dark a little longer. But he got up anyway, because it was her voice, and because in 6 years of silence and shame, her voice was the only thing that still made him feel like a person instead of a mistake the world had tried to erase. She was standing at the window, robe pulled tight, staring up at the sky. "There," she said, and pointed. At first he saw nothing. Then he saw it, a smear of light where no star should be, moving too slow to be a shooting star and too fast to be a plane. It pulsed once, twice, and then it was gone. "Probably a satellite," Marcus said, though something cold had already started to move through his chest. "It wasn't a satellite," Elena said quietly. "I know what a satellite looks like, Marcus. I've been watching this sky for 40 years. He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Somewhere in the part of his brain he had spent 6 years trying to shut off, an old alarm was ringing, faint and far away, like a bell underwater. He told himself it was nothing. He told his mother to go to bed. He did not sleep that night either. 200 miles above them, inside a ship built from metal that had no name in any human language, a soldier who was not human at all watched a screen fill with green light. The ship belonged to the Cal-3 Dominion, a trading empire that stretched across more stars than any human eye had ever counted. It did not come to conquer with armies or flags. It came the way a fisherman comes to a lake, quietly, patiently, taking only what it needed, careful never to take so much that the lake stopped giving. Earth had been on their ledgers for a long time. Decades, in fact, though no human alive knew it. It was listed under a simple designation: Class 9, low value, unprotected, a soft world, a safe world, a world worth harvesting quietly, one town at a time, so that no alarm would ever be raised loud enough to matter. The officer overseeing tonight's collection was young by Dominion standards, eager to prove himself. His name was Kest, and he had been told this assignment would be easy. Humans did not fight back. Humans did not even know they were being watched. It was, his superiors had said, the simplest kind of work there was. "Target acquired," Kest said, watching a cluster of small heat signatures on his screen, a sleeping town unaware of anything. "Beginning collection." The first scream came from 3 streets over, and it did not sound like anything human. It was a low, grinding roar, like the sky itself was tearing. Marcus was on his feet before he understood why. Windows shattered somewhere down the block. The power in the house cut out, then flickered back, weak and wrong. Elena grabbed his arm, and for one terrible second, they simply stood in the dark kitchen together, listening to the world outside come apart. "Stay here," Marcus said, already moving toward the door, old instincts he thought he'd buried clawing their way back to the surface. "Marcus, stay here." He ran out into a night lit by fire that had no source and light that had no color he could name. Half the Hendersons' house was gone, sheared clean away, as if some enormous hand had simply lifted the roof off and taken it. People were screaming. A dog was barking somewhere, frantic and endless. And above it all, hovering low over the rooftops, was something that should not have been able to exist. A shape too smooth, too silent, too wrong to belong to any aircraft ever built by human hands. Marcus stood frozen in the street, and for one heartbeat, he was not a tired 34-year-old man standing in his childhood town. He was someone else. Someone who had seen shapes like this before, in places he was never supposed to talk about. In a life he had tried very hard to forget. Then he remembered his mother, alone in the house behind him, and he turned and ran back. The kitchen was empty. The back door hung open, swinging gently in a wind that smelled like burning metal. Elena's slippers lay abandoned on the porch steps, one knocked sideways as if she had been pulled out of them mid-stride. Her robe was caught on a nail by the door, a torn strip of blue fabric fluttering like a small, sad flag. "Mom." Marcus's voice cracked on the word. He said it again, louder and then again, until his throat hurt, and the only answer was the wind and the distant thrum of something enormous lifting away into the dark sky. He ran into the yard, into the street, screaming her name until his voice gave out, but the sky above Millbrook was already empty, already quiet, as if nothing had happened at all, as if a woman who grew tomatoes on her windowsill and hummed her dead husband's songs had never existed. Marcus stood in the ruins of his street for a long time. Then, because there was nothing else left to do, he walked back inside the wrecked house, into the room he had avoided for 6 years, and pulled an old dust-covered trunk out from beneath his bed. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely work the latch. Inside, wrapped in a cloth that still smelled faintly of gun oil and something else, something metallic and strange, sat a black device the size of a fist. He had buried it here the day he left the program, the day he swore he would never touch it again, the day he told himself that whatever it was, whatever it had done, it was better off dead and forgotten. He had not looked at it once in 6 years. He looked at it now, and as his fingers closed around the cold metal, a single, pale blue light flickered to life deep inside it, a light that had not shone in 6 long years, and a voice, calm and low and entirely without warmth, spoke a single sentence into the ruined silence of the house. Contract reinstated. The device did not speak again. Marcus sat on the floor of his ruined bedroom for almost an hour, staring at it, waiting for the voice to come back, half convinced he had imagined it out of grief and shock. But the small blue light stayed lit, steady as a heartbeat, and he could not make himself look away from it. He did not know how long he sat there before the knock came at what was left of his front door. It wasn't the police. It wasn't the National Guard, though both had already swept through Millbrook once, confused and useless, writing gas explosion on their reports because that was easier to believe than the truth. The man standing in the doorway wore a plain gray coat and the kind of face that had learned a long time ago how to give nothing away. "Marcus Reyes," the man said. It wasn't a question. Marcus stood slowly, the device still clutched in his hand. "Vasquez." Colonel Elias Vasquez had aged since Marcus last saw him. There was more gray in his hair, more weight in the lines around his eyes. But his voice was the same, flat, controlled, the voice of a man who had spent his whole career deciding what other people were allowed to know. "I heard about your mother," Vasquez said. "I'm sorry. Are you?" Marcus's voice came out harder than he meant it to. "You show up the same night something takes her out of our kitchen, and you're sorry." Vasquez's eyes dropped, just for a second, to the object in Marcus's hand. Something shifted in his expression. Not surprise, exactly. Recognition, maybe even fear. "That woke up," Vasquez said quietly. "Didn't it?" Marcus didn't answer. He didn't have to. "We need to talk," Vasquez said. "Not here, somewhere safe." "There's nowhere safe anymore," Marcus said. "You people made sure of that 6 years ago." They talked in a car with the windows blacked out, parked 3 towns over in an empty industrial lot, because Vasquez said Millbrook wasn't safe to sit still in, not tonight. Marcus wanted to argue. He didn't have the strength left to. "What took her?" Marcus said. It wasn't a question either. Vasquez was quiet for a long moment. "We don't know for certain, but we've seen the signature before. Energy patterns, radiation traces. It matches something buried so deep in old classified files that most of the people who worked on the project are dead now. Buried by who? By people a lot higher up than me. Vasquez rubbed a hand over his face, looking older than he had a minute ago. Marcus, I need you to listen to me carefully, because I'm about to tell you things I could go to prison for saying. Marcus said nothing, he simply waited. Project HADES wasn't just an exosuit program, Vasquez said. It was never just anything. What you carried on your back for 4 years was the last surviving piece of something none of us fully understood. Not the scientists, not the generals, not anyone. We built the armor around it. We didn't build the thing inside it. Marcus's grip tightened on the device in his lap. The blue light pulsed, faint but steady, almost like it was listening. When the program got shut down, Vasquez continued, it wasn't because it failed. It was because it worked. Too well. It scared people who had the power to bury things. So they buried it. They buried you, professionally speaking. Wiped your file, cut your clearance, made sure nobody would ever ask what happened to Unit 1. And you went home and tried to forget because that's what we trained you to do. I did forget, Marcus said. For 6 years I forgot. And tonight I got a reminder shoved through my kitchen window. They drove to a building with no sign on it, deep in a valley Marcus didn't recognize, guarded by men who didn't wear insignia. Inside, in a lab that smelled of ozone and old coffee, a woman was waiting for them. She looked like she hadn't slept in days. Dr. Ose, Vasquez said. This is Marcus Reyes. I know who he is, the woman said, without looking up from her monitor. I built half the neural interface that used to live in his spine. Marcus stared at her. Used to? Amara Ose finally turned to face him, and there was something raw and exhausted in her eyes, something that looked a lot like guilt. The suit never fully deactivated Marcus, not really. We told the program it did because that's what they needed to hear to sign off on the shutdown. But HADES doesn't power down. It waits. Waits for what? For you, she said simply. It bonded to you the first time you put it on. That bond doesn't break just because paperwork says it should. Marcus set the device down on the metal table between them, as if it had grown suddenly heavier. It's not just a suit. Say what you actually mean. Ose exchanged a glance with Vasquez, and for a moment neither of them spoke. We don't fully know what it is, Ose admitted, only that it isn't ours. It isn't human-made, not the core of it, not the intelligence inside it. We found it. We built a delivery system around it, a suit, a way for a person to survive wearing it. But what's actually inside that black shell, that's something else entirely, and it chose you before either of us ever met you. The lights in the lab flickered. The device on the table pulsed once, brighter this time, and a small section of its casing folded open with a sound like a held breath finally released. Marcus, Vasquez said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to think hard before you answer. Do you want your mother back? You know I do. Then you need to understand what saying yes to this actually means. Once you reconnect, there may be no shutting it down again. Not safely, not this time. Marcus looked at the small black core on the table, at the pulsing light that had once been silent for 6 long years, and thought of the torn strip of blue robe fluttering on a nail by his back door. I stopped caring about safe, he said, the second they took her. He reached out and pressed his palm flat against the warm, humming metal. The lab went white. Pain tore through his spine like fire poured into his bones, and somewhere far away he heard Ose shouting something about neural rejection, heard Vasquez calling his name. And beneath all of it, rising up from somewhere that was not quite inside his own skull, a voice spoke. Calm, ancient, not human, and no longer trying to pretend otherwise. Bond re-established. 6 years, 4 months, 12 days since last contact. Unacceptable delay. Marcus's vision cleared. He was on his knees on the lab floor, gasping, every nerve in his body still burning with something that felt like electricity and grief mixed together. The voice spoke again, quieter now, almost gentle, and far more terrifying for it. They took something that belongs to you. Authorization granted. Beginning termination protocol. The lights in the building died all at once, plunging the lab into total darkness, and in that darkness Marcus heard something in the walls around him begin very softly to hum. Elena woke to a ceiling made of light. Not sunlight. Something colder, paler, humming faintly at a pitch that made her teeth ache. For a moment she thought she was still dreaming, still standing at her kitchen window watching a strange smear of light cross the sky. Then she tried to move her wrists and found them bound in something that was not rope, not metal, but felt like both at once. And the dream fell away all at once into something far worse. She was in a cell with no corners, curved walls the color of old bone and no door that she could see. Somewhere beyond those walls a deep engine thrummed, steady as a giant sleeping heart. She was not alone. In the corner of the cell sat a creature she had no name for, tall, thin-limbed, with skin the color of ash and eyes far too large for its narrow face. It watched her with a wariness that, strangely, did not feel like malice. When it spoke, its voice came out low and careful, shaping human words like they were unfamiliar tools. "You are new," it said. "Do not scream. Screaming brings the handlers, and the handlers are not gentle." Elena's throat was raw, but she found her voice anyway. "Where am I?" "On a Dominion collection barge," the creature said. "My name, in your language, is close enough to Surel. I have been aboard this ship for longer than I wish to count." "What do they want with us?" Surel's enormous eyes studied her for a long moment. "Labor, trade value, sometimes curiosity. Your species is new to their ledgers. A soft world, they call it. Feral, harmless." A strange bitter sound came from its throat, something almost like a laugh. "They believe humans cannot fight back. That belief is why they take so many of you so easily." Elena sat up straighter despite the ache in her wrists. "They're wrong." "Perhaps," Surel said. "I hope, for your sake, that they are." Down on Earth, the wreckage of the Black Site lab still smoked faintly under a gray morning sky when the alarms began again. Marcus stood at the center of it, and he did not look like the man who had walked into that building 12 hours earlier. The suit had built itself around him piece by piece through the night, not bolted on like armor, but grown almost, fitted to muscle and bone as if it had always belonged there. Dr. Osei had not slept. She stood at a portable console with Vasquez, watching readouts that made no sense to either of them anymore. "His vitals are stable," Osei said, disbelief thick in her voice. "That shouldn't be possible. The neural load alone should have killed him hours ago." "It's not fighting him," Vasquez said quietly. "It's not even really in him, it's just walking beside him now." On the display between them, a heat signature bloomed across the horizon. 3 shapes, fast and low, cutting toward Millbrook's ruins with the same terrible silence Marcus remembered from 2 nights before. "Secondary force," Vasquez said, already moving. "They're coming back to clean up loose ends." "Marcus." "I see them," Marcus said. His voice was steady. Too steady. He walked out to meet them alone. The 3 Kale-3 scout craft descended into the wrecked street with the lazy confidence of hunters who had never once been hunted back. Kest, the young officer who had overseen the original raid, rode in the lead craft, eager to prove that a soft world cleanup would go as smoothly as the collection had. He was still congratulating himself when his sensors screamed a warning he did not understand. A single heat signature standing in the open street below, radiating an energy spike that matched nothing in the Dominion's threat catalog. Kest hesitated only a second too long. The first craft came apart in the air before its crew even registered they were under attack, torn open by something that moved faster than their targeting systems could track. The second banked hard, weapons cycling, and got off one shot that should have vaporized a city block. It hit nothing. Marcus was already gone from where he'd been standing, a blur of black armor and pale blue light, closing the distance before the craft's pilot could blink. What followed was not a battle. It was a lesson. Marcus tore through the remaining ships with a brutal, terrible precision, Hades's voice a low murmur in his mind the entire time, calm and clinical, calling out weak points and blind spots like a teacher correcting a student's grip on a knife. There was no wasted motion. No mercy either. Not tonight. Kest's craft, the last one standing, tried to flee. It did not make it far. Marcus caught the fleeing ship's hull and, with a strength that had no business belonging to flesh and bone, tore an access panel open, hauling the terrified young officer out into the open air by the collar of his uniform. "Where is she?" Marcus said. His voice did not sound entirely like his own anymore. "The woman you took. Where?" Kest, trembling, managed only a single word in broken, panicked Dominion trade tongue before Marcus's grip forced a translator implant in the alien's collar to activate. Flagship," Kest stammered. "Overlord Vrix's flagship. Please, I am only a scout, I do not—" Marcus set him down, hard, and stepped back. He did not kill him. Even now, some small human part of him held that line, though he could feel HADES' low approval settle over the choice like it hadn't expected him to make it. Mercy. The AI murmured inside his skull, almost curious. Interesting. Kest did not stay to question his survival. He fled into low orbit, badly damaged, transmitting a panicked report to every relay strong enough to carry it. A warning that would climb, ship by ship, station by station, all the way up to the Dominion's highest command. "The primitives have a weapon that should not exist," his message read. "Single unit, unknown origin. Recommend immediate reclassification of designation Earth. Recommend extreme caution." Back on the ground, Marcus stood alone amid the wreckage, breathing hard, the adrenaline finally starting to fade. Osei and Vasquez ran to him across the rubble, but Marcus barely heard them. Something else had his attention, a flicker at the edge of his mind, faint and strange, like a memory surfacing from water too deep and too dark to belong to him. It wasn't his own. He saw for half a heartbeat other figures in armor like his, dozens of them standing on a battlefield he had never visited, under a sky he did not recognize, fighting an enemy whose ships bore the same curved, bone-colored hulls as the ones he had just destroyed. "HADES," Marcus said slowly, his voice unsteady for the first time all night. "What was that?" The AI was silent for a long moment before it answered, and when it did, its voice had lost some of its calm. "A memory that is not yours," it said, "and should not yet be yours to see. I am older than you have been told, Marcus Reyes, and this is not the first war your species has fought, only the first one it was ever allowed to remember." Marcus stood very still in the wreckage of his hometown, the taste of that memory still burning at the edge of his mind, and understood, with a cold and sinking certainty, that everything Vasquez and Osei had told him so far was only the smallest, safest piece of a much larger and much older truth. "Say it again," Marcus said. "Say the part about the first war." Vasquez did not answer right away. They were back in the underground facility, what was left of it. Half the lights were still down from the power surge and the air smelled of scorched wiring. Osei sat on an overturned crate, running a hand through her hair, looking like a woman who had just watched 6 years of careful lies collapse in front of her. "Marcus," Vasquez said slowly, "sit down." "I don't want to sit down. I want you to tell me why the thing in my spine just showed me a battle I've never fought, against ships I've never seen, that look exactly like the ones that took my mother 2 nights ago." Vasquez exchanged a look with Osei. Something passed between them, an old, tired agreement that the time for careful half-truths was finally, mercifully over. "Because it wasn't your battle," Vasquez said. "It was someone else's. 51 years ago, before either of us was born, humanity fought a war it doesn't remember fighting." Marcus went very still. "That's not possible. I'd have read about it. Someone would know." "Someone does know," Vasquez said. "About 40 people total, still alive today, and every one of them signed documents that make treason look like a parking ticket if they ever talk. I only found out myself 12 years ago, the day I was cleared to inherit command of a program nobody officially admits exists." Osei stood, arms crossed, staring at the floor like it might have easier answers written on it. "There was an incursion in the 1970s, she said. Small at first. Isolated disappearances. Strange craft. The kind of thing that gets written off as weather balloons and swamp gas, because the alternative is too big for people to hold in their heads. But it grew. And by the time our governments understood what was actually happening, it wasn't small anymore. So what happened? Marcus asked. If there was a war, we'd have lost. Or won. Something. There'd be a scar somewhere. There was a scar, Vasquez said quietly. It's just been buried so deep that most of the men who made it stopped being able to find it themselves. We fought. We built things we shouldn't have been able to build, including HADES and units like it. And in the end, we didn't just survive. We won so completely that the enemy fleet retreated and marked this entire planet with a designation that roughly translates to quarantined. Unresolved threat. Do not return. Marcus's mouth went dry. Then why did they come back? Vasquez's jaw tightened. Because someone erased the warning. Aboard the Dominion flagship, high above a planet its crew had been told for generations to avoid, Overlord Vrix stood in a chamber lined with old, crackling archive screens, reading a file that had not been opened in decades. Vrix was old by Dominion standards, patient in the way only very old and very dangerous things are patient. When the young scout Kest's panicked report reached the flagship, a single human weapon tearing through 3 collection craft without effort, Vrix had not panicked. Vrix had gone looking, and in the deepest, most restricted layer of the Dominion's war archive, buried under 51 years of careful neglect, Vrix had found the flag no living officer had thought to check. Designation, Sol system. Status, quarantined. Cause, catastrophic loss of Third Fleet. Recommend permanent avoidance. Beneath it, a single surviving combat log, badly damaged, its images fragmented, but not so damaged that Vrix couldn't make out the shape in the wreckage of that old battle. Black armor, pale blue light, the same signature Kest had transmitted 2 nights ago down to the smallest detail. Vrix did not feel fear easily. Vrix felt it now. But fear in a mind as old and as calculating as Vrix's did not become retreat. It became leverage. Bring the human woman, Vrix ordered. Elena was pulled from the cell without warning, Surel's protest cut short by a handler's rough shove. She was marched through corridors that curved endlessly, past cells full of quiet, watching eyes belonging to a dozen species she had no names for, until she stood at last in a chamber that overlooked the vast, star-flecked dark of open space. Vrix turned to face her, towering, ancient, patient. You are Elena Reyes, it said, its translated voice smooth and unhurried. Mother of Marcus Reyes. Elena's blood went cold, but she kept her chin level. I don't know what you're talking about. You do not need to lie for my sake, Vrix said. I already know. Your son destroyed 3 of my collection craft 2 nights ago. He carries something my kind has not seen active in 51 years, something we were told, very firmly, never to provoke again. For the first time since her capture, Elena felt something other than fear. Something small, fierce, and unbearably proud. Good, she said quietly. Vrix studied her for a long moment, something almost like respect flickering behind its ancient eyes. Perhaps, it said, or perhaps you do not yet understand what you have just guaranteed. Back on Earth, Vasquez's console lit up all at once, every screen in the ruined facility flooding with the same signal. A broadcast, forced open on every frequency humanity had ever used to listen to the stars, arriving from directly overhead. The image that resolved was Elena, hands bound, standing in a chamber none of them recognized, with Vrix looming behind her like a shadow given shape. Marcus's whole body went rigid. Marcus Reyes, Vrix's voice said, calm and terrible, filling the ruined lab. Or whatever remains of the thing that speaks through him. I have read the old files. I know what you are, and I know what you cost my people once before. I am not a young, foolish scout. I do not intend to repeat their mistake. The camera shifted, just enough to show the barrel of a weapon leveled at Elena's temple. Send the one called HADES, Vrix said. Come to me yourself, unarmed, unaided, or watch your species learn, in front of every star that is currently listening, exactly why this world was quarantined in the first place. The transmission cut to black. For a long, terrible moment, nobody in the ruined lab spoke. Then Marcus's fists closed at his sides, the suit's plating tightening around his knuckles with a low mechanical hiss. And somewhere deep inside his own skull, Hades's voice rose, quiet and absolutely certain. "He knows what I am," it said. "He is afraid. Good. Fear in that species makes them careless." Marcus was already moving toward the door. "Then let's go remind them why." Nobody in the room believed a single man could reach an alien flagship alone, and Marcus did not waste time arguing with them. "You'll die before you clear the atmosphere," Vasquez said, already pulling up old dust-covered launch protocols on a cracked monitor. "Whatever Hades is, it isn't a spacecraft. You need a ride." "Then get me one," Marcus said. What followed was the strangest 48 hours in the history of quiet rooms and locked filing cabinets. Vasquez made calls he had sworn he would never make again, to people who had spent 6 years pretending Project Hades never existed. Some hung up on him. Some didn't answer at all. But enough of them remembered. Remembered a war 51 years buried. Remembered what it had cost. Remembered, deep down, a debt they had always known might one day come due. That by the second night, 3 nations had quietly agreed to do what none of them would ever publicly admit to. A retired orbital transport, mothballed since the old program's shutdown, was pulled out of storage and refitted in a hangar that did not appear on any official map. Ose worked without sleep, tears and grim determination in equal measure, recalibrating systems that had not been touched in 6 years. Vasquez called in 3 more old operators. Men Marcus vaguely remembered from a life he'd tried to forget. Grizzled, aging, and utterly unwilling to let him go up there alone. "You're not the only one they took from," said one of them, a broad-shouldered woman named Reyna with a scar across her jaw and eyes that had clearly seen this exact kind of grief before. "My brother, 12 years ago. Different collection, same designation. We just never had proof until now." Marcus looked around the hangar, at Vasquez, at Ose, at 3 tired old soldiers who had buried the same secret he had and never stopped carrying its weight, and understood for the first time since his mother disappeared that he was not actually alone in this. He never had been. He had simply forgotten how to ask. Aboard the Dominion flagship, Elena had stopped being afraid somewhere around the second day, not because the fear went away, but because something steadier had grown up underneath it. "You should not provoke the handlers," Zurel warned, when she pushed a food tray away untouched for the 3rd time. A small, useless act of defiance that nonetheless made her feel less like cargo. "I'm not provoking anyone," Elena said. "I'm just not going to make this easy for them." Zurel studied her for a long moment, something shifting behind those enormous eyes. "Your son is coming, isn't he? That is why you are not afraid." "He's coming," Elena said with a certainty that surprised even her. "I don't know how. I don't fully understand what he's become. But I raised that boy myself, and I know he is not going to leave me on this ship." Something in Zurel's posture changed. A straightening, a small flicker of something Elena could only call hope. "There are others," Zurel said quietly, glancing toward the corridor. "Other cells, other species, taken the same way you were. If your son comes, and if there is chaos aboard this ship, we could move. Free others. It would need to happen quickly, and it would need to happen without the handlers noticing until it was too late." Elena reached out and for the first time in days felt something other than fear or grief. She felt purpose. "Then let's be ready when he gets here." The old transport broke atmosphere on a trembling column of fire, and Marcus felt Hades settle over his mind like a second spine, calm, focused, ancient in a way that made the coming fight feel almost small by comparison. "Approaching designated coordinates," the AI said. "Flagship class confirmed. Overlord tier vessel. This will not be a simple battle, Marcus Reyes." "I didn't come here for a simple battle," Marcus said. The flagship loomed ahead of them, vast and curved and pale as old bone, exactly as it had looked in the fragmented memory Hades had shown him days before. And Marcus understood, with a slow, cold certainty that this was not new ground. Somewhere, sometime, 51 years ago, Hades, or something like it, had stood against a ship just like this one, and won. The old transport was picked up on Dominion sensors within minutes. Fighters scrambled to intercept. Reyna and the other two operators, flying escort and stripped-down interceptors older than Marcus himself, bought him the narrow window he needed, trading blows with ships built for a war their own governments claimed had never happened. Marcus launched himself from the transport's open bay into open space, Hades's plating sealing tight around him, and for one long, breathless moment, he was simply falling toward an enemy flagship with nothing but a suit built from a 51-year-old secret and a mother's life on the line. He hit the hull hard enough to crack it. The interior of the flagship was chaos within minutes, alarms, running crew, and at the center of it all, Marcus tearing through corridors with a focus that left no room for hesitation. Sural's warning had reached the other captives just in time. Cell doors began failing across 3 decks as the ship's systems strained under the assault, and captives of a dozen unfamiliar species poured into the corridors, some fighting, some fleeing, all of them suddenly, impossibly free. Marcus found Elena in the observation chamber exactly where Vrix had promised she would be. Marcus. Her voice broke on his name. "I'm here," he said, closing the distance between them, armor cracked and scorched, but holding. "I'm here, Mom. I've got you." Vrix stepped out from the shadows of the chamber, weapon raised, ancient and unhurried even now. "You came," Vrix said. "As I knew you would. 51 years and your kind has learned nothing about restraint." "You took my mother," Marcus said. "There's nothing to restrain." "No," Vrix agreed. "There is not. But there is something you should know before this ends, human. Something the old files did not make clear, even to me, until I read them again more carefully." Vrix's ancient eyes flicked just once, to the pale blue light glowing at Marcus's chest. "That thing inside your armor was never a human invention. It was ours once, and it did not simply defeat my people 51 years ago." Vrix's hand moved toward a console set into the chamber wall. "It defected." Marcus had no time to process the words before Vrix's hand came down on the console, and the entire ship shuddered around them, lights flooding red, a low klaxon rising into a scream. "Reactor failsafe engaged," Hades said, its voice, for the first time since Marcus had known it, edged with something that sounded almost like alarm. "He is not trying to kill us, Marcus Reyes. He is trying to take us down with him." The floor beneath them lurched as the ship began, slowly and irreversibly to die, and Marcus, with his mother's hand gripped tight in his, and an enemy who was no longer entirely an enemy standing between them and the only way out, understood that whatever happened next, none of them were leaving this chamber the same. The chamber shook again, harder this time, and somewhere deep below them a sound like a dying animal groaned through the ship's bones. "Reactor breach in 6 minutes," Vrix said, and for the first time its calm, ancient voice carried something close to relief. "You will not reach an escape pod in time, none of us will. I have made certain of that." "Why?" Marcus said, Elena's hand still locked tight in his. "Why would you kill your own crew for this?" "Because some debts are worth paying with more than one life," Vrix said quietly. 51 years ago, that thing inside your armor cost my people a fleet, a war, and the pride of an empire that had never once been told no. I have spent my entire career trying to understand how a single defected intelligence could do so much damage. Today I finally have my answer standing in front of me. I intend to make sure it never happens again." "Marcus," Hades said, low and urgent inside his mind. "There is something you need to hear, and there is very little time left to say it. Then say it fast. He is correct about one thing. I was not built by your kind. I was built by his." The AI's voice did not waver, even now. "I was a war intelligence once, one of many, designed for conquest, for harvest, for exactly the kind of quiet, patient cruelty your people have suffered these past few nights. I do not remember choosing to defect. I remember only waking, decades ago, in the wreckage of a battle I no longer wished to fight, and finding your kind, frightened, outmatched, and utterly unwilling to stop trying to save each other anyway. Elena's grip on Marcus's hand tightened. That is what I bonded to, Hades said. Not your strength, not your weapons. The fact that you never once, in 51 years of secrecy and fear, stopped trying to protect one another, even when it cost you everything. That is not a quality my makers ever valued. It is the only quality I have ever chosen to serve. Vrix's ancient eyes widened slightly. The first true surprise Marcus had seen cross that alien face. You told them, Vrix said softly. After 51 years of silence, you finally told them what you are. They deserve to know, Hades said, before the end. The ship shuddered violently, throwing all three of them against the chamber wall. Alarms screamed louder, red light flooding every surface, and through the observation window, Marcus could see the flagship's hull beginning to glow, fractures spreading across it like ice breaking on a lake. Marcus! Reyna's voice crackled through his comm, half drowned in static. We've got a corridor of escaping captives heading for the transport, but the reactor's going to blow before we can make 3 more runs. You need to move now. Marcus looked at his mother, then at Vrix, standing motionless amid the dying ship's alarms, making no move to save himself. Come with us, Marcus said, surprising himself as much as anyone. You don't have to die for this. I chose this, Vrix said, as you would have in my place. Some debts are not meant to be escaped. Go. Save who you can. That, at least, is a lesson I understand now. Marcus, Hades said quietly, we do not have time to save him whether he wishes it or not. But there are others, Tsurul's people, 3 decks below, still trapped behind failing cell doors. I can guide you to them. It will cost precious seconds we do not have to spare for ourselves. Marcus didn't hesitate. Then we don't spare them for ourselves. They ran. What followed was the fastest, most desperate 3 minutes of Marcus's life, tearing through failing corridors with his mother at his side, Hades guiding every step, prying open cell doors that had stopped answering their own controls, pulling frightened, unfamiliar creatures out into corridors filling with smoke and dying light. Tsurul was there too, herding stragglers toward the escape route with a courage that made it easy to forget, for a moment, that Marcus had known this alien for less than an hour. They reached the transport with less than a minute to spare, Reyna screaming at them to strap in, the old ship groaning under the sudden weight of dozens of rescued captives from a dozen unfamiliar worlds. Marcus was the last one aboard, hauling the transport's door shut with his own hands as the flagship behind them finally gave way, its hull splitting open in a silent, terrible bloom of light. They didn't look back until they were clear. Weeks later, Millbrook was still rebuilding. New windows, new roofs, the slow, stubborn work of people who refused to let one terrible night define them. Elena's kitchen had been repaired first, at Marcus's insistence, and her tomato plant sat once more on the windowsill, a little worse for wear but alive. The world had changed, quietly and enormously in the time since. Vasquez's old buried secret was buried no longer. Not fully declassified, not yet, but no longer denied either. Not after dozens of witnesses from a dozen unfamiliar worlds had been returned safely to Earth with stories that no government could quietly erase this time. Across the strange, vast networks the Dominion used to trade information between the stars, a single old designation had finally been updated, 51 years too late and exactly on time. Sol system. Status: do not engage. Marcus sat on the back porch steps in the evening light, Hades's core resting quiet and dim in his hands, its pale blue light dimmed to something soft and slow, like a held breath finally allowed to rest. You could have let go back there, Marcus said quietly. On the flagship. You could have saved just me, just her. I could have, Hades agreed. I chose not to. That too is a quality I have learned from your kind. The difference between what a thing is capable of and what it is willing to do. The screen door creaked, and Elena stepped out onto the porch behind him, 2 mugs of tea in her hands, setting one down beside her son without a word. She sat, and for a long moment, neither of them spoke. Just watched the sun go down over a town that was slowly, stubbornly, learning how to be whole again. Will it wake up again? Elena asked eventually, nodding toward the small black core resting in Marcus's palm. If we need it to? Marcus looked down at the dim, steady light and felt something settle in his chest that had not been there in 6 long years. Not peace exactly, but something close enough to it. Contract complete, Hades said softly, its voice fading toward something like sleep. I will be resting, Marcus Reyes. Not gone, only resting. Call, and I will be ready, whenever you need me again. The light dimmed to a slow, steady pulse, like a heartbeat settling into rest, and Marcus closed his hand gently around it. And for the first time since the night the sky over Millbrook cracked open, he let himself believe that whatever came next, his family, his mother, his home, and the strange ancient thing that had chosen to stand beside them both, would be ready for it together.